In grappling with the climate problem, as a journalist, I paid too much attention to climate scientists. That's why all my articles focused on climate change. And it was 2006. I remember now pretty clearly. I was asked by the Week in Review section of the New York Times to write a sort of a weekend thumbsucker, we call them, on
thumbsucker.
You sit and suck your thumb and think about something. Why is everybody so pissed off about climate change? It was after Al Gore's movie, the Al Gore movie came out, Inconvenient Truth, Hurricane Katrina. It was a big Senator Inhofe in the Senate from Oklahoma. Wasn't yet throwing snowballs, but it was close to that. And so I looked into what was going on. Why is this so heated? In 2006, the story's called Yelling Fire on a Hot Planet. And that was the first time, this is after 18 years of writing about global warming. That was the first time I interviewed a social scientist, not a climate scientist. Her name was Helen Ingram. She's at UC Irvine. And she laid out for me the factors that determine why people vote or what they vote for, what they think about politically. And they were the antithesis of the climate problem. She used the words, she said, people go into the voting booth thinking about things that are soon, salient, and certain. And climate change is complex, has long time scales. And that really jogged me. And then between 2006, 2010, I started interviewing other social scientists, and this was by far the scariest science of all. It's the climate in our heads, or inconvenient minds, and in how that translates into political norms and stuff. Really became the monster, not the climate system.
Is there social dynamics to the scientists themselves? Because I've gotten to witness a kind of flocking behavior with scientists. So it's almost like a flock of birds. Within the flock, there's a lot of disagreement and fun debates, and everybody trying to prove each other wrong, but they're all kind of headed in the same direction. And you don't want to be the bird that kind of leaves that flock.
No.
So like there's an idea that science as a mechanism will get us towards the truth, but it'll definitely get us somewhere, but it could be not the truth in the short term. In the long term, a bigger flock will come along and it will get us to the truth. But there's a sense that I don't know if there's a mechanism within science to like snap out of it if you're down the wrong track. Well, usually you get it right, but sometimes you don't. When you don't, it's very costly.
And there's so many factors that line up to perpetuate that flocking behavior. One is media attention comes in. The other is funding comes in. National Science Foundation or whatever, European foundations pour a huge amount of money into things related to climate. And so your narrative in your head is shaped by that aspect of the climate problem that's in the spotlight. I started using this hashtag a few years back, narrative capture, like be wary of narrative capture, where you're on a train and everyone's getting on the train. And this is in the media too, not just science. And it becomes self-sustaining, and contrary indications are ignored or downplayed. No one does replication science because your career doesn't advance through replicating someone else's work. So those contrary indications are not necessarily, really dug in on. And this is way beyond climate. This is many fields. As you said, you might have seen this in AI. And it's really hard to find, it's another form of path dependency, the term I used before. But breaking narrative capture for me, has come mostly from stepping back and reminding myself of the basic principles of journalism. Journalism's basic principles are useful for anybody confronting a big, enormous, dynamic, complex thing is who, what, where, when, why. Just be really rigorous about not assuming because there's a fire in Boulder County or a flood in Fort Myers that climate, which is in your head because you're part of the climate team at the New York Times or whatever, is the foreground part of this problem.
What's the psychological challenge of that if you incorporate the fact that if you try to step back and have nuance, you might get attacked by the others in the flock?
Oh, I was. Well, you've certainly been.
So both of you get attacked.
Yeah.
Continuously from different sides. So let me just ask about that. How does that feel? And how do you continue thinking clearly and continuously try to have humility and step back and not get defensive in that as a communicator?
I mean, there are other things happening at the same time, right? I'm now 35 years into, almost 40 years into my journalism career. So I have some independence. I'm free from the obligations of, I don't really need my next paycheck. I live in Maine now in a house I love. I own it outright. It's a great privilege and honor. And as a result of a lot of hard work. And so I'm freer to think freely. And I know my colleagues in newsrooms, when I was at the New York Times, in the newsroom, you become captive to a narrative, just as you do out in the world. The New York Times had a narrative about Saddam Hussein, drove us into that war. The Times sucked right into that and helped perpetuate it. I think we're in a bit of a narrative. We, the media, my friends at the Times and others, are on a train ride on climate change, depicting it in a certain way that really, I saw problems with how they handled the Joe Manchin issue in America, the West Virginia senator. They really kind of piled on and zoomed in on his investments, which is really important to do, but they never pulled back and said, by the way, he's a rare species. He's a Democrat in West Virginia, and which a seat that will be otherwise occupied by a Republican. There'll be no talk of a climate deal or any of that stuff without him. But once you're starting to kind of frame a story in a certain way, you carry it along. And as you said, sometimes it breaks and a new norm arrives. But the climate train is still kind of rushing forward and missing the opportunity to cut it into its pieces and say, well, what's really wrong with Florida? And it's for me, when you ask about how I handle the slings and arrows and stuff, it's partially because I'm past worrying about it too much. I mean, it was pretty intense. 2009, Rush Limbaugh suggested I kill myself on his radio show. It's a really great
What was that about?
I had, actually, this was a meeting in Washington in 2009 on population at the Wilson Center. I couldn't be there. So actually, this is pre-COVID, but I was Zooming in or something, like Skyping in. And I was talking about, in a playful way, I said, well, if you really want to worry about carbon, this was during the debate over carbon tax model for a bill in America, we should probably have a carbon tax for kids, because a bigger family in America is a big source of more emissions. Yes. And it was kind of a playful thought bubble. Some right-wing blogger blogged about it. It got into Rush's, pile of things to talk about. And the clip is really fun.
Also meaning, if humans are bad for the environment, we can... I can imagine.
It's amazing.
Rush.
He was
that's how you know you've made
explicit. He said, Mr. Revkin of Andrew Revkin of the New York Times, if you really think that people are the worst thing that ever happened to this planet, why don't you just kill yourself and save the planet by dying?
So that was tough for you.
It was tough for my family. To me, it did generate some interesting calls and stuff on my voicemail. And but on the left, I was also undercut. Roger Pilkey Jr., a prominent researcher of climate risk and climate policy, UC Boulder, was actively, his career track was derailed purposefully by people who just thought his message was too off the path. And you've been dealing with this for a very long time.
God, yeah.
What do you?
So look, I just want to get back to the science. I don't think the science get it so much wrong as it just becomes accepted to make certain assumptions, as you just said. We assume no friction. So there's a way that you kind of model the world that ends up being also a convenient message in many ways. And I think the main convenient message in climate, and it's not surprising if you think about it, the main convenient message is that the best way to do something about all the things that we call climate is to cut CO2. And that turns out to only sometimes be true, and with a lot of caveats. But that's sort of the message.
It takes a long time.
Yes. It's really, really difficult to do in any meaningful sort of time frame. And if you challenge that, yes, you're outside the flock and you get attacked. I've always somebody told me once, I think it's true. They say at the at Harvard Law School, if you have a good case, pound the case. If you have a bad case, pound the table. And so I've always felt that when people go after me, they're kind of pounding the table. They're literally screaming, "I don't have a good case. I'm really annoyed with what you're saying." And so to me, that actually means it's much more important to make this argument. Sure, I mean, I would love everyone just saying, "Oh, that's a really good point. I'm going to use that." But we're stuck in a situation, certainly in a conversation, where a lot of people have invested a lot of time and energy on saying we should cut carbon emissions. This is the way to help humankind. And just be clear, I think we should cut carbon emissions as well. But we should also just be realistic about what we can achieve with that and what are all the other things that we could also do. And it turns out that a lot of these other things are much cheaper, much more effective, will help much more, much quicker. And so getting that point out is just incredibly important for us to get it right. So in some sense, to make sure that we don't do another Iraq and we don't do another, lots of stupid decisions. This is one of the things mankind is very good at. And I guess I see my role, and I think that's probably also how you see yourself, is trying to get everyone to do it slightly less wrong.
So let me ask you about a deep psychological effect for you. There's also a drug of martyrdom. So whenever you stand against the flock,
right? Yep.
There's you wrote a couple of really good books on the topic. The most recent, False Alarm. I stand as the holder of truth, that everybody who is alarmist is wrong. And here's just simple, calm way to express the facts of the matter. And that's very compelling to a very large number of people. They want to make a martyr out of you. Are you worried about your own mind being corrupted by that, by enjoying standing against the crowd?
No. There's very little. I guess I can see what you're saying, sort of in a literary way or something.
Yeah,
but there's
being
very
poetic here.
Yeah, there's very little comfort or sort of usefulness in annoying a lot of people. It just whenever I go to a party, for instance, I know that there's a good chance people are going to be annoyed with me, and I would love that not to be the case. But what I try to do is, so I try to be very polite and sort of not push people's buttons unless they sort of actively say, "So you're saying all kind of stupid stuff on the climate, right?" And then try to engage with them and say, "Well, what is it you're thinking about?" And hopefully, during that party, and then it ends up being a really bad party for me. But anyway, so I'll end up possibly convincing one person that I'm not totally stupid. But no, I'm not playing the martyr, and I'm not enjoying that.
It's so interesting. The martyr complex is all around the climate question. Michael Mann, at the far end of the spectrum of activism from where Bjørn is a climate scientist who was actively attacked by Inhofe and Virginia politicians and really abused in many ways. He had come up with a very prominent model of looking at long-term records of climate change and got this hockey stick for temperature. And he definitely sits there in a certain kind of spotlight because of that. So it's not unique at any particular vantage point in the spectrum of sort of prominent people on the debate.